Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's a story that you heard that still gives you chills to this day? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. This happened my senior year of college, Christmas break 2006. I worked for a professor that asked me to house or dog sit for him while he was out of town to see the bowl game that we were in. He was gone for 3 days and had a huge piece of land in the middle of nowhere. I invited my girlfriend at the time. He had horses and fishing and a gator to ride around on, etc. So the first 2 nights went down with no incident. But the last night, his little fluffy dog is having a fit. She keeps barking at the back door. At first, we blow it off, but decide to look and lock the dog inside in case of a coyote or something. After a while, we start to get a little creeped out. I kept saying it's probably an animal, we'll be fine. My girlfriend, not too bright, wants to go investigate to see what's outside. So I lock the door from behind her, just kidding. She goes outside and says she saw something small and gray, probably a coyote, and it ran off. So just an animal, no worries. But by this time, we're pretty spooked. The dog now starts barking at the window on the other side of the house. We're still trying to ignore it, but we're a little worried. We decide to get into bed. Awkward silence, then I hear it. It sounds like a young girl singing a soft, eerie lullaby. I remain silent, hoping that my mind is deceiving me. My girlfriend says, "Let's leave this place." I say, "Why?" She says, "You didn't hear that little girl singing? Okay, let's get the fuck out." And we got the fuck out. I even called someone to talk to me while we walked out to my car. The next morning, I went to clean up the house and such. I've never been more scared ever. The night before my brother's wedding, he found himself driving home on a nearly deserted road. He stopped at a red light, and over on his right was this really tall man, dressed like an insane homeless person, holding a huge styrofoam cup to collect change. There was something about him that caught my brother's eye, and he decided to give him some money. While he was reaching in his pocket to get cash, the light turned green. Just as he was retrieving the cash from his pocket, 3 seconds after the light turned green, a garbage truck sped through the intersection, accompanied by 2 police officers. The homeless man vanished from sight. Apparently, when my dad was quite young, he got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. In my grandpa's house, you have to cross the kitchen to get to the bathroom. Anyway, my dad comes out of the bathroom into the kitchen, and things start flying across the room at him, like the kettle and a bunch of other stuff from the countertop. So my dad flees from the kitchen crying into the living room, where he recognizes a figure he believed to be his brother, and rushes to embrace him. Then my grandparents came out of their room and turned on the living room lights to see what the commotion is. My dad stood in the center of the living room, holding nothing, while my uncle remained in bed. Whenever I go to my grandpa's house and wake up needing to go to the bathroom, I hold it. I used to live in a suburb of Chicago in a house with a large backyard with a garden. One day when I was maybe 3 or 4 years old, my sister and I were outside playing in the back while my dad worked in the garden. This guy was walking his dog along the sidewalk by our yard, and since we were little kids, we went running to pet the dog. The guy stopped and let us play with the dog for a little bit, and then began walking again as we were playing with it. We get to the next house over, and the guy says, "Do you want to come to my home and play with my dog?" We say yes and start following him. When we got 2 houses down, we heard our dad far away yell our names, and we said, "Oh, sorry, we have to go." About 7 or 8 years later, Megan's Law is passed, and we find out that the man is a registered offender. Some days, Dad would just get, I suppose you'd describe it as a waiting sort of mood. Apprehensive is the word, I think. He appeared to be anticipating something. On these days, toward the end of the day, he would briefly lighten up before a dread flickered over his face. This was something I grew accustomed to over the years and never questioned. Then Pop-Pop died. At the time, we knew he was dying. He worked alongside asbestos decades ago, and had mesothelioma. It was hard to watch him deteriorate, and at the time, all noticed about my own father was him struggling to remain positive. This was his father, after all. It would be any day, they told us. They didn't know when, but Pop-Up was close. One morning after spending the night at my dad's house, I awoke to him sitting at the dining room table, head in his hands. I sat, he looked at me, and I noticed how tired he was. I wouldn't know until later that he'd been awake in that spot from 2 a.m. onwards. He's gone. Gone? I knew what he meant, but was confused. I didn't hear the phone ring. He hesitated, and then told me about the ladies and their kitchen. It's never in the same place. Sometimes it's a house he walks into, floating as one tends to do in dreams. Once it was a windmill in a field. Once it was a cave. The setting never matters, he said, because it's the same kitchen when you walk through the threshold. There are the same cabinets, the same paint, and the same food. He told me about the women. His grandmother, his maternal great-grandmother, and his paternal great-grandmother. These were women he knew during his lifetime, but they had long since passed away, never more or less, never different. The women were always present in the same kitchen. They never speak, he told me softly. Not at first. This dream started a series of dreams, all ending the same way. In this kitchen, with these females, not speaking. The dreams could go anywhere from several days to a week or more. He told me that every night they didn't speak to him only made him more and more anxious, almost sick. And this was when I realized that I'd seen him that way so many times before. Then you walked in one night. Last night I had to cross a highway and swim to get to a tiny house where it was. I walked in and they were sitting at the table. He said that he never goes to sit down. The women look up at him, teacups filled, one extra cup waiting in an empty seat. They look as though they've been interrupted during a grave conversation. And then one randomly says, "Sit down, Jeffrey." He was silent after saying this, rubbing his eyes and flexing his other hand. I waited for him to gather himself, and when he had, he told me that was the end of it. Not only did he describe a single dream, but he also described the sequence of those dreams along with something else. I still didn't understand, and so he quietly provided the answer. He explained that these dreams signify the impending death of someone he holds dear, that the women only invite him to sit when the person has gone. The last one in the sequence had awoken him around 2 a.m., and he knew without having to be told. He called the hospital and talked to his grieving mother, who confirmed she'd just been about to call him and his siblings with the news. We had Pop-Up's funeral. We lowered him into the ground. I didn't say anything about the dreams. How much of that could I believe? I was 15 then, still struggling with high school and the drama that came along with it. I wasn't about to tell my friends about these freaky dreams my dad claimed to have. Years passed. I transitioned from being a freshman in high school to a freshman in college. I found a niche and flourished, enjoying my newfound freedom. It had been so long since I'd thought about my dad's dreams of the kitchen and the women. One of my new friends brought a flyer to my dorm one night, excitedly telling me that Lady D was coming to the campus. She claimed to be a genuine psychic, and I felt compelled to attend, as I knew it would be an enjoyable experience, so I went. The women I met drew a small crowd, and we sat in a large circle around her in our common area. She told us about fortunes and how she had a guide on the spirit plane. It was common shit you hear about when so-called psychics. She finally allowed us to ask questions, and I, on a whim, asked her if she believed in spirits who watched over each person, like guardian angels or that sort of thing, I said. I'll never forget what she said. "One of the women who watches over your father is here with you," spirit companion says. "He can see her in a kitchen. Don't worry though. The fact she's here means no one's about to die." Well, having nightmares is one thing, and I'm sure this would be unsettling, but overall, I think that there's a lot of sweetness to that story. Not that anyone would necessarily want those dreams. It's a heavy burden, but a great responsibility. So glad you got somebody watching over you. The summer before my sophomore year in college, I had surgery on both legs, and the recovery took way longer than expected. It got to the point where I had to withdraw from school in order to fully recover, so I went home for the rest of the year. Anyway, after about 4 months at home and my legs working, I figured I'd get a job and make some money, so I applied and got a job waiting at a popular chain restaurant. I quickly became friends with 2 of my fellow servers, Oscar and Louis. Oscar was a really friendly Hispanic guy, and Louis was the kid from New York with the typical cocky attitude. Anyway, fast forward another couple of months, and we all head to Oscar's house to watch one of the NBA playoff games. His parents live there, so we introduce ourselves and thank them for letting us hang out. Neither of his parents knew who we were, so we introduced ourselves. Both his mom and dad were really kind and welcomed me as I introduced myself. But when Louis introduced himself, Oscar's mom had an uneasy look on her face and asked to talk to Oscar in private. We're watching the game when Oscar comes back, and we ask what that was about, and he says not to worry about it. So we brush it off and just continue watching the game. It ends up going into overtime, but Louis can't stay for some reason or another, so he heads out, and I end up staying and watching the game with Oscar. After Louis leaves, Oscar tells me why his mom pulled him aside earlier. Apparently she had a nightmare the night before, and in the dream, Oscar had met somebody named Luis, and nothing good came out of it. She warned him to be careful around Louis, as she didn't trust him. We kinda laughed it off, but it still hung in the back of our minds. A couple of weeks later, I get a call from a female coworker of mine crying, asking me to meet her at another mutual friend's place. So I hop in my car and head over. I met her and Oscar at this guy's house, and she told us Louis had R'd her the night before. Oscar and I looked at each other but said nothing. It could have been a coincidence, but I still get chills thinking about it and how Oscar's mom warned him that Louis would be trouble. Mother and father get a little tired from building communism, so they want to go to Moscow to buy vodka. They call her the most trusted babysitter. When the babysitter arrives, the children are already asleep in beds. The babysitter just sits around and makes sure everything is good with the children. Later that night, the babysitter gets bored and goes to read Marx. But she can't read downstairs because there's no electricity. Parents didn't want children reading Marx all night long. So she calls parents and asks if she can get candles to read Marx in their room. Of course, the parents say it's okay, but the babysitter has one final request. She asked if she could cover up the Lenin statue outside the bedroom window with a blanket or cloth because it makes her nervous. The phone line is silent for a moment, and the father says, "Take the children and get out of the house. We will call militia. We do not have a Lenin statue." Militia find all 3 of the house occupants dead because the KGB killed them for trying to cover the Lenin statue. Then, militia arrest parents for not having a Lenin statue. Such is life in Moscow. During World War II, my great-grandfather was a Ukrainian who spoke fluent German. When the Nazis captured his town, they put a German officer in charge of one of the factories. Upon learning that my great-grandfather could speak Ukrainian and German, he was given a choice: serve as an interpreter for the Nazi overseer, or be taken outside and shot. A few years later, after the war was over, word got out that he had been a Nazi collaborator, and he was placed on a list to be purged. He accidentally learned of this and evacuated his family from Ukraine before the order was carried out. 40 years later, the Chernobyl nuclear reactor meltdown near my family's ancestral home, poisoning the countryside with nuclear fallout that is yet to dissipate. Our distant relatives still live there and were in correspondence with my grandfather. Some years after that, my grandfather's cousin sent him a letter with the story. She and her family went to the market one day to find a merchant selling huge ripe blueberries. They tried a few and they were delicious, sweet, and wonderful. They bought out his entire stock. Ukrainian winters had been cold and grim even before they were radioactive. The family decided to can the berries and save them from a time when something sweet would be a welcomed change. They spent all afternoon putting the blueberries in canning jars. Even years after the meltdown, the majority of the water in the area required purification before it was safe to drink. Purification takes time. Most people set it up before they go to bed. In the middle of the night, she woke up thirsty and made her way to the kitchen. She got a glass full of water from the purifier and noticed something reflecting light from the pantry. That was odd. It was a cloudy night, and this far from the city, there wasn't much to reflect. She went closer to inspect. It was then that she noticed, all clustered together, those big, ripe blueberries were radioactive enough to just perceptibly glow in the dark. 7 or 8 years ago, during a stretch of hot, dry days in August, I attended a bluegrass festival at Thomas Point Beach in Brunswick, Maine. The headliner of the festival that year was Ralph Stanley, who had been on the bluegrass scene since the late 40s, but had been recently cast into the national spotlight because his song "Oh Death" had been included in the "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" soundtrack, right? On the day of Ralph Stanley's performance, I was at the front left of the stage. Ralph was dressed in black from his boots to his cowboy hat, and I remember thinking he must have been sweltering in the heat. It was a typical but talented performance, but after 3 songs, the rest of the band stopped playing, and Ralph grabbed his mic and stepped forward a few paces. And after a few moments, he started singing his new big hit, "Oh Death," in his old quavery voice. After just a couple of lines, I noticed several of the people standing around me were turning away from the stage. When I turned my head to see what was happening, I realized I was standing at the edge of a cleared space within the crowd, at the center of which was a heavy-set woman splayed on her back, with someone kneeling next to her giving her CPR. Ralph Stanley is extremely old, and I imagine that he couldn't see what was happening, even though it was no more than 30 feet away from the stage. So he just continued to sing, "You run my life right out of my soul. Oh death, please consider my age. Please don't take me at this stage." I remember a woman standing beside me, a stranger, touched my arm and without taking her eyes away from the woman on the ground, said, "Do you hear this freaking song? Is this happening right now?" By the time the song had ended, the man had stopped giving the woman CPR. She was dead. We learned later it was a heart attack. The crowd was stunned and totally silent, and in the silence, you could hear the sound of an ambulance siren growing in the distance. Later that night, my friend struck up a conversation with the fiddle player from Ralph Stanley's band after getting an autograph. He invited him to come jam with the band in their bus. During a whiskey break between jams, my friend asked the band member something along the lines of, "So that was pretty traumatic out there today, huh?" The fiddle player laughed and said, "Sheesh, that's happened like 4 times," and took a shot of whiskey. About 10 years ago, my dad's best friend and his family moved into a house that he newly built. They demolished the house and stood there before. It belonged to my dad's best friend's great aunt or something. Regardless, this house is incredibly large, featuring a spacious room on the 2nd floor that initially served as a playroom and storage area. At that point, their youngest daughter was a little older than 3. A few months after moving into the house, the little girl was playing in that huge-ass room I told you guys about myself. She went downstairs and asked for candy. She got it. A couple of minutes later, she came down again asking for candy. Her mom, of course, was a little suspicious and told her that she had just eaten candy and she was not giving her more. The little girl then said that it wasn't for her. It was for the boy. The boy. Her brother was at school and she didn't have any other kids over. So her mom went upstairs with her to see what was up. She made her way over to the big-ass room, and there was no one in there. Her mom asked her if she was sure there was a boy there. The girl said she was positive, but it looked like he had left. Of course, we asked her if he was an imaginary friend, but she said that he wasn't her friend. He saw her with candy, and he really wanted it. Even now, the thought of entering that house fills me with fear. Admira Izmik, born 1968, and Boško Brkić, born 1968, were a couple who were natives of Bosnia and Herzegovina, living in the city of Sarajevo. She was a Bosniak, and he was a Bosnian Serb. With Sarajevo under lockdown by Serbian troops, their divided heritage compelled them to seek a means of escape. Having friends on both sides involved in the conflict, there was a general thought that their passage through the city and its infamous sniper alley, under constant fire from hills occupied by the Serbs, could be a safe one. They arranged for no one to fire as the couple approached on 19 May 1993 at 1700 Geneva Mean Time, +1. As soon as they were at the foot of the bridge, a shot was heard. The bullet hit Boško Brkić and killed him instantaneously. A second shot echoed, causing the woman to scream and fall down and sustain injuries, but she remained unharmed. She crawled over to her boyfriend, cuddled him, hugged him, and died at his side. Due to the sniper activity in the area, no one dared to approach the bodies for over a week, and they remained together on the bridge. My dad told me this one, and so a few details might be hazy, but it's not important. He was working out in Saudi Arabia and used to sail a lot in the Gulf with his friend on something called a Hobie 16. Is that a thing? I don't know boats. One day, after a really long day sailing up and down the coast, they were exhausted, and the wind is so strong they're able to sail the boat right up onto the sand at the end. When they get onto the shore, there's a family of Pakistanis looking distressed, and one of them comes over and asks my dad if they'd seen a windsurfer out on the water because someone was missing. My dad has been up and down that stretch of coast all day and has seen no one surfing, so he's reluctant to go back onto the water. Remember, he and his mate are both exhausted, but the guy tells him all about the windsurfer, gives him a description, white guy, etc., and just for safety's sake, my dad agrees to go back out. They set out, sailing up and down, but saw nothing. As the sun began to set, they began to suspect that the people on the shore might have been mistaken. Suddenly my dad spotted a small silhouette on the water. Unable to stop the boat due to the wind, they must pass close to the object to identify it. It turns out to be a small Pakistani boy clinging to a box. My dad scoops him up as they go past, and the boy wordlessly huddles into a ball in the middle of the boat. Enraged, my dad navigates the boat back to the family and up to the beach once more. As the boy jumps off to greet his parents, my dad demands to know why they lied about it being a white man surfing. The guy tells my dad that they didn't think he'd go out and look if he'd known there was a Pakistani missing. Apparently, the boy had been playing with the box by the shore and then floated out a bit. No one could swim to go get him. My grandmother lost her husband before I was born. Days after his death, my grandmother, a Catholic woman, went to her church to find comfort. She couldn't drive, so my uncle accompanied her to the church. As she went inside, he stood at the door and waited for her. She sat in the pew praying, and after a while, a young nun came and sat with her. The woman talked to my grandmother and comforted her and even stayed to pray with her for a while. Eventually, the nun departed and exited the church. Soon afterwards, my grandmother emerged from the church. Recalling the nun's exit, she asked my uncle if he had gotten a chance to talk to the nun. He looked confused and explained to my grandmother that there had been no one to enter or exit the church the entire time, and he had seen no nun. Even though my grandmother watched the nun exit the very door my uncle was standing next to. I live in Chicago, and a few years back I was renting a huge garden apartment with my girlfriend. We got it specifically so we could get pets, but that's not really relevant. There was a huge living room and kitchen, and in the kitchen there was a back door to the other part of the basement. It was all concrete floors, and it had stairs to the backyard, washers and dryers, and a path to the storage. The light in the washer and dryer room was automatic, but it always took a second or two to turn on. The walls were all cinder block, and on the far side of the basement there was this room that was clearly built after the building. The room was also made of cinder block, and it protruded from the wall approximately 10 feet out. The door was equipped with 4 locks. The locks on the door included a combination lock, a standard doorknob, a large padlock, and some bars that could be pushed down. I never thought anything of it until one night I went in there and realized that before the light went on in the basement, I saw light beneath the door. I looked closer and realized that the door opened outward and the locks were there to keep it shut. After leaving the basement, I turned off the light and peeked around the corner to see if the basement room light was on. It was. It unnerved me a bunch, but I didn't want to explore anymore, so I kept on my usual routine again. Then one night I saw that on the east side of the protruded room, there was a hole in the wall where some light was peeking out into the gap between the basement wall and the room's wall. I was too afraid to look in there for weeks and weeks, and then a couple of nights before we were to move out, a few friends and I got a bit drunk and decided to look into the hole. I got up on some crates and peeked through. The room was empty, except for a table with some random stuff on it, a small cot, and a chair. There was a picture on the wall, but due to the angle I couldn't see it. Someone was seated on the chair facing away from me, and they undoubtedly heard me get up on the crates, but they didn't turn around. I say they because I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. They had long dark hair, not black though, and since they were sitting away from me, I couldn't see their outfit or their body structure. I almost blacked out from fear, though I don't know why. Nothing was threatening me, but man, that made me uncomfortable. Sometimes I think I dreamt it. The guys noticed the expression on my face and chose to ignore it. We returned to my place, secured the doors, and enjoyed a peaceful night. The house is still there, but I don't think I'll ever go back. In 2003, at 11 years old, I was in the hospital for a bone disease called osteomyelitis. I met a friend who was in my ward for 4 weeks. Week after week, I made friends, and they healed and were set free. But this one cool dude was the nicest friend I'd ever had. Regrettably, the circumstances surrounding his birth were difficult to articulate, but he always knew he wouldn't live a full life. His mother and father were alcoholics and drug addicts, so he lost them at age 4 and got a foster mother. He was consistently subjected to bullying in school due to his appearance, mannerisms, and behavior, as well as the actions of his parents. He was in the hospital for surgery after surgery, and before his last operation, he said to me, "Graham, if you're gone by the time I come back, I just want to say thanks for being my first and only best friend, and please, take this as a gift." He presented me with rosary beads and a picture he had drawn of me, demonstrating his amazing talent for art. I woke up the next morning to his foster mother crying at my bed. He passed away during the last operation. I was deeply shocked and saddened by the news, but then his foster mother turned to me and thanked me for bringing him some joy before his departure, stating, "You were his only friend. What an amazing kid he was." Oh. I actually made an account to tell this story. The neighborhood that I grew up in was on the outskirts of Oklahoma City. We lived in a house my grandparents built, and we knew all our neighbors. We were never afraid to ride our bikes everywhere, and everyone looked out for one another. About 3 doors down from where I lived, there was a house that we always called the murder house. The brutal murder of the man who lived there and the horrific awe of his girlfriend occurred before I was born. Our across-the-street neighbors recovered the murder weapon, a machete from a neighborhood greenhouse in their backyard. People always assumed that the murder was the result of a botched drug deal. The case remained cold for a long time, and the house sat abandoned for as long as I could remember. When I was growing up in my house, my bedroom windows faced our street. Sleeping in the room from the ages of 4 to 11, I would always wake up in my middle of the night after having really spooky dreams. At a young age, I never fully comprehended the reasons behind my constant sense of surveillance. One day, my parents quietly installed blackout shutters in my room, but I never asked why. We moved away from that house when I was 11. Shortly after we moved, someone bought the murder house, fixed it up, and the events that happened there were just a distant memory. Flash forward to 2 years, November 26th. I was sitting in bed one night watching Cold Case Files on A&E. I picked up the episode in the middle of the story, but something about it seemed really familiar. Suddenly, the water tower of my hometown flashed on the screen, and the image of that infamous house came up as Bill Curtis started to describe the crime that had taken place there. As it turned out, they had solved the murder. The murderer wasn't a drug friend, as originally suggested. He was a peeping Tom that had been terrorizing my neighborhood for nearly 20 years. He had peeked into the window of that house on time that evening of the murder, seen the man's girlfriend, and set about attacking her. Hearing the commotion, her boyfriend came to her defense, only to face slaughter in that house. The peeping Tom escaped and continued to look in the windows of the other houses for years. The memories of waking up in the middle of the night and the feeling of being watched had been very real, but nobody could catch him. We placed blackout shutters on my bedroom windows to prevent him from peeping into my room at night. The man was finally caught because of a peeping Tom complaint filed by a woman about 3 blocks away from my old home. The man was notorious for not wearing shoes, and it was the imprint of his bare foot in the garden that was matched to a bare footprint at the crime scene. I still find it unsettling to think about it. I was talking to a good friend of mine the other day. He and I served together in the infantry, and we both spent some time doing some secret squirrel stuff. Well, he re-enlisted and kept working his way deeper into the secret squirrel world. None of that matters except for context. We were at a reunion of old friends from our time in Afghanistan, and he was explaining why he doesn't have any social media presence and why people shouldn't put his name on photographs of us. He opened with this story, and it makes me sick to my stomach every damn time I retell it, and it's dead short. An operator was living in Southern California, had been working leads against the cartel. He had spent quite some time down in the South and was home with his wife in beautiful sunny Southern California. The cartel somehow located him, likely via Facebook or some other ridiculous method. They located him and stormed the house. They arred his wife in front of him, then made him watch as they murdered her. Afterwards, they strung him up like a piñata in the living room. At first, when I heard this, my normal instinct came in. I would have fought harder and made a difference. But then the reality, the gravity of the situation sank in. The man this had happened to, the situation left me feeling significantly more confident that I had ever been. See, to me, that's where it really hit me how bad the situation was. In many of these stories, an untrained man is forced to go through this, and he could have made a difference if properly trained. Well, this man was a bad motherfucker in his own right, and I can scarcely imagine watching this occur to my family. The thought of it literally makes my stomach turn. It makes me want to re-enlist because it reminds me that some people shouldn't live. I know Reddit disagrees with me on that, and I can't disagree that many who are killed deserve life, but men like this? Men like those who run the cartels and perpetuate violence and suffering worldwide? Some people just shouldn't live, and their absence would be for the greater good.